You're watching Reality Check. Now, it should have been clear to even amateur analysts that a deeper malaise is afflicting the Indian economy. And yet it's unclear whether the government is fully willing to confront exactly how deep-seated or long-term the problem is. Note, for instance, the BJP president's remarkable description earlier this month that the fall in the GDP was because of technical reasons. Since then, there have been reports of multiple meetings between the Prime Minister and key financial advisors and talk of a stimulus, though we simply don't know at this stage whether that is entirely true or what that entails. Today at the party's national executives, concerns over the economy are said to have come up. The only concrete announcement, though, appears to be the setting up of an advisory council headed by Bibek Debroy, an economic advisory council, and the announcement of something called the Saubhagya scheme on household electrification. All of it in a WhatsApp-friendly format, but none of it appears to be remarkably new. The finance minister, when asked on the economy, played down the extent of the problem, claiming that the economy has by and large been healthier than before.
If you look at broadly most of the macroeconomic data, the last 3.5 years have shown that it has been sounder than ever before. Except in the last quarter, there has been a little dip in the GDP, which I have already addressed.
Now, first of all, the fall in the GDP has not just been from the last quarter, but as this graphic shows, over multiple quarters, falling from about 9.2% in quarter 4 of FY 2016 to 5.7% in this latest financial year quarter. So clearly suggesting that it was just one tiny glitch does seem somewhat confusing. Also suggesting that the macroeconomic data has by and large been excellent in the last 3 years is not quite the case. Let's look, for instance, at industrial production. Starting point March 2016, if we take from 5.5% down to 1.2% in July of this year. Consumer spending is also down. Starting again at the same point, March 2016, 9.31%, down about 3% to about 6.5%. Exports are again down from about 1.53 lakh crores to about 1.45 lakh crores in June. Mr. Jaitley went on in what sounded almost like the technical problem logic. He claimed that the slight blip in GDP in the last quarter is because of poor credit and what is known as destocking ahead of GST. Now, destocking simply means reducing stocks. In other words, manufacturers offloading as much stock as they could ahead of a new tax regime.
Now, this is obviously attributable to two factors. One to do with investment in the private sector, which is also relatable to the ability of the banks to support growth. And the second, that since the GST date was announced as 1st of July, in the months of June and July, normally the destocking took place.
Now, Mr. Jaitley is obviously right about banks. Figures show that lending has consistently fallen. If one looks at the figures there, starting off with looking at what is known as non-food bank credit, that's down from about 9% in March last year to about 5.3% in July this year. Agriculture credit has actually come down even more dramatically from 15% in March last year to just 7.5% this year. But his explanation of destocking, one that has been made earlier as well as a key reason for the drop in the GDP, has been countered in this analysis by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, which says that blaming destocking rather, it says is untenable. It says that profits fell 28% in manufacturing from June of last year because though they were offloading more goods, expenses for businesses were growing at about 13%. The key reason, it said, is that demand has been lukewarm and consumer sentiment low. CMI, in fact, has warned that prospects of a revival in demand during the ensuing festive season are not high. And it goes on to say that this low growth is all the more worrying because the government has had good conditions to operate in. Government efficiency, it says, has been high. No new supply hurdles from traditional sources. Electricity availability is at its best. No raw material availability constraints like gas and ore and so on. And interest rates are not rising, and direct tax regime remains benign. Well, despite that, why are we where we are, and is the government in denial mode? Joining me tonight on the show, Dr. Pranab Sen, former chairman of the National Statistical Commission, Professor Jayati Ghosh, who's at the Economic Studies and Planning School of Social Sciences at JNU. In our studio, Dr. Jagdish Shettigar, economic professor at BIMTech and someone associated with the BJP, and Ajay Kumar, spokesperson of the Congress. Dr. Pranab Sen, why do you believe that even now, despite all the evidence to the contrary, the government still seems to be not fully acknowledging the extent of the crisis and constantly finds ways to play it down?
That's actually quite inexplicable, because if you really, as you rightly said, the growth rate has been falling steadily for 5 quarters. So it's not something that can be attributed immediately to any of the recent triggers of demonetization or GST. And therefore, I think it would have made perfect sense to ask the question, why has this been happening? And then ask the question that what can or should we at all do anything to correct it? Unfortunately,
yes,
I think the problem is that if you wish to put a positive spin on everything that's going on, then you're forced into positions which are essentially untenable.
Right.
And more importantly, if you actually believe in the spin that you're putting on, then you're not going to be able to do anything sensible.
Right. Jayati Ghosh, let me just take this to you. I know that you co-authored a book with others on demonetization and what a disaster that turned out to be. But obviously, as we all know, and as Pranab Sen himself said, there are a number of factors which are contributing to the slowdown. How serious or deep-seated do you think the impact of all these collective factors are on what we're seeing, on what's going on with the economy?
Well, I think it's absolutely true that the demonetization occurred in a context in which the economy was already slowing.
Right.
So that's absolutely the case. Investment has been coming down now. The investment rate has been declining for nearly 5 years. And we were in a situation where, despite a very favorable external environment, growth was not picking up, and we were not going back to the higher growth rates that we had seen earlier. But demonetization was a body blow to the economy, and particularly to the informal economy. GST is another body blow to the informal economy. So I think we have to also recognize that in this situation where things were slowing down anyway, you are now, if you like, giving further disincentives for growth. I think the real problem stems from the way that the government is trying to formalize the economy. I mean, wanting to formalize the economy is a very good thing. We're all in favor of it. But there are two ways of doing it. One way is to say, well, we're just going to kill off the informal sector. Never mind that there are lots of people in it. Most people are in the informal economic activities.
Right.
And then the formal sector will grow. But if you look at when capitalism has been dynamic, it's always happened the other way.
Right.
It is the expansion of the formal sector that has then killed off informal activity. It doesn't work if you just basically destroy economic activity of millions of people and then say now the formal sector will come in, because you're killing demand.
Right.
And the real problem now in the economy today is that there are no sources of demand other than public spending.
Okay.
Everything else is down.
Right. And before we come to that, before we come to public spending and whether now that is the way forward or not, I just want to bring in Jagdish Shettigar here, because you have a situation now, Dr. Shettigar, where even those that we may call insiders to this government, or those who have been defenders of this government have begun to sound the alarm. We'll just put those graphics up on the screen for you. Surjit Bhalla, who has just been appointed today as a member of this Prime Minister's newly created Economic Advisory Council, has said the average GDP growth for the past 2 years prior to the election of Narendra Modi in May was 6.4%, even if for the rest of this fiscal, growth averages an unlikely 6.5% each quarter. The numbers will not match the UPA average for their bad years. Yes, that's how bad GDP growth is today. Subramanian Swamy has said that today the economy is in a tailspin. It can crash. And yet the government doesn't seem to be accepting how bad the problem is. You just heard what the finance minister said. He said things in the past 3 years have actually been remarkably good.
I think probably
You're smiling there slightly.
those who are inside probably might have got influenced by certain factors like stock market,
Sure.
which was doing well till recently,
Yes.
and also because of the foreign exchange reserves, which has crossed more than 400 billion.
Sure.
But both are because of inflow of foreign institutional investment,
Right.
which they have started taking back since the August 1st.
So then why
Probably they were
why are they not
going go with this, but otherwise the disturbing signals started coming almost since the last 8 to 9 months.
But why is the
IIB
government,
has been fluctuating.
why are they so we all know the disturbing signals.
Yeah.
Now we put it on our screen again and again. Why do you think there's a reluctance to acknowledge it and to tackle it in ways that go beyond the cosmetic, like for example announcing a committee, an economic advisory council at this stage, on one hand headed by people like Bibek Debroy and Surjit Bhalla, and on the other hand you're announcing a 16,000 crore free electricity scheme?
No, constituting Economic Advisory Council is good, but I think it is too late, because right now if they come out with certain measures,
Right.
I don't think that the government will be in a position to implement it,
Right.
because hardly there are 18 months for the elections. No government in the world go for the economic reforms which is required when at the election time.
Right.
So I don't think that the Economic Advisory Council will be effective in giving the advice to the government at this point of time.
That's pretty candid coming from you, that you're saying it's simply too late because it's going to be politically inconvenient. I want to come to Pranab Sen once again before I come to you, Dr. Ajay Kumar, because before this turns political, you made a point in a piece that I read that you wrote, or you were quoted in Mint, where you said that when you were tracing the factors for the reason why there's a slowdown, you pointed to something which not enough people have spoken about, which is about rural growth having slowed down. And you actually said that in 2004 to 12, rural growth was high, but in 2013, and this is right, in fact, during the Congress years, it started to come down. And that's been a contributor as well.
That's right. The fact is that one of the reasons that we came out of the global crisis so quickly was because rural growth stayed up. And rural India is simply not connected with the rest of the world, except insofar as global food prices are concerned. Now, what has happened since 2013 is sequentially, the drivers of rural growth have been hit. It started with the MSP growth being brought down from an average of 6 to 7% in
Right.
the previous 7 years to just 3.5%. Right? It started with that, but it went well beyond that, and at every stage you've been hitting rural incomes.
Right.
So today we have a situation where food prices are in the negative territory. So although the production of food is going up at 3%,
Right.
the income of farmers is going at less than 1%.
Right.
Now that's not going to generate rural growth for you. To make matters worse, you have a situation today where, because of the restrictions on cattle trade, the animal husbandry sector, which had been growing at an average of 4.5%, has slowed down dramatically. Now, these are things which, if you're making policy, you have to take into account.
Sure, fair enough.
If those are sacrosanct, then you have to think about what do you do to counter that.
Okay, let me put that to Ajay Kumar. What would you, Ajay Kumar? I know that you would clearly want to criticize the government for its handling of the economic scenario, but what would you have the government do at this stage? Because there is talk, there has already been government spending which has gone up, and there is talk perhaps of more government spending. When the government talks of a stimulus, possibly that's the thing they have in mind. Is that the way you believe that the government should go?
Srinivasan, there are a couple of leverages which the government has, and like Jagdish ji said correctly that the time is limited. But some of the things like lifting the controls on export of food products, increasing the import duty on import of food grains would give a great deal of boost to the rural sector. The other issue is if you travel across rural India, the Manrega has to be revitalized because there's a huge amount of rural distress.
Right.
The Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, people saying they're making roads, but in the rural areas, actually speaking, I don't see it. When I travel to Jharkhand, and Jharkhand, I believe, is a reflection of the other parts of India. Okay, the same amount of activity in the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana is not happening. So,
okay, but that could be anecdotal.
Huge amount of focus on the rural area.
Right.
No, that could be anecdotal. I agree. That could be anecdotal. So, I mean, we need to see it. But the other issue is, how much of scope do you have in reducing interest rates? That's a question mark. The second issue, the government has to go gung-ho in, like it or not, it needs to get into more of investment, more in terms, especially on those sectors which not only create infrastructure, but we impact people. And the second point, which I think is resolve the other point is resolve the chaos in GST. No, resolve the chaos in GST.
Okay.
I'll just finish off with that. The chaos in GST continues.
Okay.
There's 65,000 credits still lying for the exporters. So those issues need to be resolved fast.